You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Hello, listeners. History with the Szilagys is back, and we very much appreciate you bearing with us during our hiatus here. It was quite a busy end of semester. We're coming back with one of the reasons that I didn't have as much time to do History with the Szilagys episodes, which is a paper I presented at the International Congress for Medieval Studies at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and it is on the topic of medievalisms in Star Trek. Now, medievalisms are not examples of the actual medieval era itself. It is how the medieval era is depicted. So what do we think about what the European Middle Ages were? So that's what you're about to hear. The audio was pulled from the talk, so there may be some places where it's not so great. And in some places, as you hear me do elsewhere, I stop and I do that. But listeners, we're glad to be back, and we're going to bring you some awesome topics over the next few weeks and through the summer. Please remember, if you have ideas for topics, we want to hear them. You can contact us on Twitter at History Szilagyi, or through our Facebook page, History of the Szilagys, or of course through BQN's Facebook page, which is the BQN Collective. Thanks for listening. For a show set solidly in humanity's future, Star Trek spends a great deal of time in the past. Unlike the effort taken in making the science of science fiction as correct as possible, transporters and such notwithstanding, such attention is not always paid to the use of historical settings, leaning on what is popularly known about the historical period rather than the realities. The focus, after all, isn't the historical setting. It facilitates making points about society, current events, and the human condition, just as the future setting is not necessarily the point. One of the best-known examples of this is the original series episode City on the Edge of Forever, in which Captain Kirk must, of course, allow the love of his life to die so that the U.S. won't be delayed in its involvement in World War II, because that prompted a chain of events that does not allow Kirk's society to come about. The time setting is relevant to the specifics, but the ideas, particularly the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few or the one, can be set anywhere or anywhen. The original series spent a great deal of time in the past. Where and when was somewhat dictated by what else was being filmed on the lot at the time, because that was cheaper. And so we have, from the 60s, lots of Westerns, lots of mid-20th century and World War II era stuff. It's a couple of Swords and Sandals episodes for good measure. If only we had been lucky enough that A Lion in Winter would have been shooting on the Paramount lot, we might have had an episode set in the European Middle Ages. We do see medieval and medievalist elements here and there, though, and what sticks out probably the most is the knight and the lady in shore leave. They are just about as stereotypical as one can get. He in full plate armor, she, of course, with a cone on her head. And there we are. This is one element of the larger story where they come across this planet that's making fantasies come alive and all of that. The original series did not do a lot with the medieval. None of them really did, except for the couple I'm going to get into toward the end. But that setting of the past and using it in that same way to discuss the current, that's consistent across the board. Sorry, I lost my paper. Here we go. Okay. The Next Generation didn't spend nearly as much time in Earth's actual past, with the notable exceptions being a visit to San Francisco in 1893 and another to Bozeman, Montana 40 years from now. They also spent a small amount of time in a medieval setting produced by the omnipotent being Q, and I'll be coming back to that later. Most of the past that we see on TNG is in the holodeck, and this is a device that creates virtual environments to the user specifications for any purpose. And they do use it for any purpose. Via this method, we see the London of Sherlock Holmes, Dixon Hill investigating mysteries in the San Francisco in the early 1940s, and a 20th century jazz club, just to name a few. Similarly, Deep Space Nine's interactions with the past are mostly in the holodecks, and there they call them holosuites. And they are for the purpose of entertainment. We tend to hear more about them than we actually see them. The example I'm going to give is one that we only see the characters coming out of. There's another one that we see redone a number of times with two of the characters who are redoing, or who are experiencing the Alamo, or a gunfight in World War II, an airplane gunfight in World War II. We don't actually get to see those. We just see them dressed up like they're going to be going in there or coming out of them. And baseball, too. There's always baseball in the holosuites. Let's see. Okay, so we hear about them more than we see them, with the exception being the 1960s Las Vegas casino that hosted crooner Vic Fontaine. DS9's two visits to the real Earth of the past are set in the 1950s and in 2024. The former of these, Far Beyond the Stars, is like City on the Edge of Forever in that the setting allows for specifics to be shown in context, but the message, a simple "don't be racist," is eternal. But the best example of medievalism in DS9 is found in the fourth season opener, and there you see on the slides there. This is from The Way of the Warrior. It is tangential to the plot, okay? So there isn't a lot to do with it, but it does show that that this is more the idea of the medieval than the reality. Again, the women with cones on their heads. So we have Kira Nerys, she's the one in the orangish pink, and Jadzia Dax, the one with the spots on her face in the green, leaving a holographic visit to Camelot. And we wouldn't have known any of that except we learned from the dialogue that Kira was supposed to be playing Guinevere, but she ruined the game when Lancelot made his romantic advances because she didn't know the story. She punched him. And when Jadzia asks about this, she says, "I was playing a married woman." And then we have some interaction. This is the first time they meet Worf. Of course, a great love story is about to happen between Jadzia and Worf, but that's for another time. And Kira, who is a very serious character, is incredibly embarrassed to be running into the new strategic operations officer dressed like this. And she, of course, says, "I don't normally dress like this," and then proceeds to get completely tangled in her hat, taking it off. Voyager also spends a bit of time in Earth's past. We have a jump to Los Angeles in 1966, we have a jump to Los Angeles in 1996, for easy, since that's where and when they were, basically. And the holodeck also allows our crew to put themselves into a 1930s style sci-fi serial called Captain Proton, a small French town during World War II, the studio of Leonardo da Vinci, who is beautifully portrayed by John Rhys Davies, and the infamous 19th century Irish village of Fairhaven. We do see a medieval program as well, though, and this is the one that puts them in the Danish forests inhabited by Grendel. In this episode, Heroes and Demons, shows a holo program in which the person puts themselves in the role of Beowulf to act out the story. There we go. The medieval is used as a setting for the Doctor to have an away mission. At this point in the series, the Doctor was stuck in the holodeck or anywhere that there were holographic emitters because he is a holographic entity. And he has not yet gotten the ability to leave these holographic areas with his what comes to be called his mobile emitter. So he has not been able to leave sickbay. This is pretty early on. It's toward the end of season 1. And this is his first time to have an away mission. Okay. It is filled with the stereotypes. A dark and depressed mead hall headed by a tired king who's all but given up, a shield maiden with the name of Freya, and a man named Unferth, an advisor to the king who is doubtful of the new arrival. We can see all of this, of course, is following from the Beowulf story, but it's also something we see in a lot of other depictions of this time in the medieval era in general. And the Doctor, of course, is coming in, and he is going to be Beowulf, but what he is actually trying to do is find his colleagues, Ensign Kim, Lieutenant Tuvok, and Commander Chakotay, who have gotten lost in the holodeck, and everybody thinks they've been eaten by Grendel because they came in as Beowulf as well. So, having presented himself, the king gives the doctor a sword that he can barely lift. Again, trope there. This prompts a fight with Unferth, which the doctor wins because he shifts his holographic form and allows the sword to just go right through him, head to the ground there, and of course bounces the sword off the stone on the floor, which hurts Unferth's arms. And so this makes it appear as though he has some very powerful magic. Okay, and they say, all right, you're going to watch for Grendel. So the doctor is supposed to keep watch alone. Of course, as you see in the bottom picture there, Freya is very interested in keeping watch with him overnight. Maybe not keeping watch so much, but definitely spending the night with him. But as he's talking to her, Grendel comes in. He's injured by Grendel. He actually loses his holographic arm. And this is how we find out that the Grendel we see is an alien that has infiltrated Voyager's systems. He's looking for his fellows that had been scooped about Voyager's crew, not realizing that this energy that they thought they were collecting was actually a life form. Armed with this information, the Doctor returns the next day to defeat the Grendel alien. On his return, he is attacked by Unferth, and Freya steps between them, and he ends up killing her instead. So this gives him more of his mission there to avenge her death in a way. The Doctor goes then to the mead hall, and he presents himself as the hero, and he has a light in a box that is the other creatures that they accidentally picked up, and he is going to offer those up to Grendel so that he'll leave, basically. He goes to the mead hall, he shows this to the king and Unferth and all of the rest of them. Unferth starts talking about how it was he, the Doctor, who murdered Freya, and no, of course not. And the Doctor scares him by waving the light box at him and proves himself a hero in a modern sense because he says, the only reason you're still alive is because I have taken an oath to do no harm. He then turns around and he calls for Grendel to come in. It's the energy monster. He holds up the light box and it collects its friends and then deposits his crewmates back. And thereby he defeats the monster and saves the ship. Then we have one of the newer Trek shows, and this is Strange New Worlds. Now, here's one where I'm going to say spoilers, because there is a huge ongoing plot point that is addressed in this, so you have my apologies if you have not seen this and care about spoilers. If you do, just, mute, and then you'll see what I'm talking about next, and you come back, okay? There we are. All right. So this is just from last year. It is an episode of the new series Strange New Worlds, which is a pickup prior to Kirk's Enterprise. It's about Captain Pike and was created by a fan campaign. We can talk about all of that at another time. But they decide to, the writers decided to do a fairy tale episode. Okay. Now, the story for them is a very old one. This centers around a book that Dr. Mbenga, the one who's the king there in the middle, is reading to his daughter, and it's a book that's written by the 20th century novelist Benny Russell. I mentioned in Deep Space Nine there is that episode that goes back to the 1950s, and in that episode it's all about Benny Russell and his struggles to be accepted and to be taken for who he is, even though he's a black man in New York in the 50s. Played by Captain Sisko inhabits the role, played by Avery Brooks. Beautifully done. You don't need to be a Trek fan to watch that one. Go watch it after Congress is over. But the reason I bring that up is because this actually establishes Benny Russell as a real character, which had been a question for the last 20 some odd years since the original episode aired, if that was all in Sisko's head or not. So we have this situation where he's reading this story. The crew unknowingly comes into the path of this entity that looks over the ship and sees that Mbenga's daughter, a girl named Rukia, is very sad. And she thinks the entity is identified by Rukia later in the feminine, so that's what I'll use. But I think it's probably, it's an energy entity. I doubt it has gender. So it sees this situation and it tries to make Rukiya happy by turning the ship into this fairy tale. Now, Dr. Mbenga is central to this. I go back to what I've written here. With the exceptions of Dr. Mbenga and Lieutenant Hemmer. Lieutenant Hemmer is the one with the antennae there. With their exceptions, the crew isn't out themselves. They've been taken over by the story characters. And it has all of the tropes of the fairy tale. Now, the king is Dr. Mbenga. He holds court in his throne room, which is the bridge. Okay? And he has attending him a noble bodyguard, Sir Adya, who is, I guess, I don't want to say played by, who's inhabiting the form of Lieutenant Erica Ortega's. Okay? There is a cowardly double-crossing Chamberlain, Sir Routh, who is inhabiting the body of Captain Pike. They oppose Queen Neve, okay, who is in the body of Cadet Uhura, and the wizard Pollux, who is in Spock, and their Crimson Guard, who is a bunch of generic red shirts, and that's why they're called the Crimson Guard. And they are all looking for the Mercury Stone. The king fears that if Queen Neve gets the Mercury Stone, she'll use it to destroy everything. He wants to protect the Mercury Stone. It's very powerful. It has all of this magic capacity to it. So it is that object that's out there that one is questing for. Now, given that this is a 50-minute episode, we don't get into the quest so much, but it is there, the idea. He's helped in his quest by a wise woman. Wasn't really sure what to call her. That seemed like the way to go. She's an herbalist and healer. This is Lady Audrey. Lady Audrey inhabits the body of Nurse Christine Chapel. There is a princess in exile named Thalia, and this inhabits the body of Laan Noonien Singh. And then we have Castor, who is Hemmer, I mentioned already. He's a wizard, but he knows who he is. And then the Huntress Zymeria, who is occupying the body of Unachin Riley, better known as Number One. They get captured, they are delivered to Queen Neve, but they're able to escape and find the Mercury Stone. The Mercury Stone is, if you haven't figured out by now, is Rukiya. This is, as I said, Dr. Mbenga's daughter. Now, part of what's so wonderful about this episode is how the fairy tale characters relate to the personalities of the people they inhabit. The cowardly Routh is found in the normally decisive and strong and decidedly not cowardly Christopher Pike. The helpless princess is played by Laan. Laan is the chief of security. She is someone that you cannot imagine being in any type of situation that makes her helpless. And also she has, quite frankly, she has a dress that just existing in would make her helpless. You can see there, it's one of those ones that's, 10 feet across at the bottom. Spock's Pollux does have some logic to him, but he's definitely a baddie, so he's using it for the wrong reasons. Lady Audrey, as a healer, has essentially the same purpose as her counterpart in Christine Chapel, but it's a little bit more mystical and a little less scientific. Sir Adya and Zymeria are similar in their counterparts and their attitudes, but we don't get a lot about them, particularly Zymeria. She shows up, she's there. She appears to be a love interest for Sir Adya, which is something that we later find that Rukiya saw in the story. Now, the interesting thing is in the Benny Russell story, because they show pictures of this throughout the episode and talk about it a bit, neither Sir Adya or Zymeria are really gendered. So having them be embodied by women, and that's still having the love story there, that's, classic Trek. We're going to throw a little bit of subversion into that, although not nearly as subversive as this was 30 years ago when they did it on DS9. Queen Neve is very strong and assertive, and these are qualities that we, as Trek fans, know that Uhura possesses, but we have not yet really seen them on Strange New Worlds. She's young, she's a cadet, she's trying to find herself, and she hasn't yet become the commander who will tell the kid to get in the closet while she beams up Captain Kirk and the rest to go to the Enterprise in search for Spock. But the thing is, Queen Neve is also quite evil and manipulative, and these are qualities we definitely don't see in Uhura. Hammer plays fish out of water beautifully because him being a telepath, he didn't get affected by this. He just had his clothes randomly changed. We'll just go with that. And he has to have the concept of a wizard explained to him because his culture does not have wizards. So he doesn't lose his identity, but he really gets into the fun of playing this wizard whose magic is, as he says, science. So we see a lot of those medieval isms, but again, like with the other episodes, the story is more the setting. I'm coming to the true spoiler here at this point because the whole thing is focused around Dr. Mbenga's daughter, who has a terminal illness, and he has been searching for a cure, but while he does this, he has her stuck in a transporter in the buffer so that she doesn't age, okay? And so she's not aware that she's stuck in a transporter buffer because you're not, but she's sad. She knows that she can't be with her father all the time. She knows that she can't be out of the buffer, as it were. And so this creature that is, well, creature is not a good word, this entity that comes across them is able to cure her and take her away, but the price is that she can't come back. Okay. And so the idea is, there's always those morals to the Trek stories, and there's a lot of them here. I think one of the big ones is, of course, to appreciate what you have while you have it, and that a parent should be willing to do anything for the safety of their child, even if it means letting them go. And of course, neither of those require a medievalist setting or a space setting to present. That one's a little heavy. We're going to come to the fun one now. And this is the first episode that came to my mind when thinking about medievalisms in Trek. Okay. And this is Cupid. Okay. This is an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. It aired about 2 months before Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves came out. Okay. So as a child, I had always thought that this was, and I saw it first run, but I thought it was a response, looking back on it, to the Robin Hood thing. And I think it was, but Prince of Thieves hadn't been released yet. Right. So in this story, the senior staff of the Enterprise D are forced to reenact a part of the Robin Hood legend in a fantasy created by Trekkie's favorite trickster god, Q. This episode is centered around an archaeological and historical conference that's on the Enterprise, which I absolutely adore and I think fits perfectly here. Q's purpose, that's why you see Picard as Robin Hood standing at the podium there, because he was giving the keynote on this particular archaeological topic. So Q's purpose in putting Picard and company into Sherwood Forest is to teach Picard about the dangerous nature of loving a woman. The woman in question is a woman named Vash. She is an archaeologist with whom Picard had a brief romance about a season prior, and she is made to take on the role of Maid Marian. Picard, of course, is Robin Hood, just about as close to Errol Flynn as you can get. Definitely not taking up the Kevin Costner idea there. And the crew are his band of merry men. Okay. The tropes are played with because in one place, Q's plan is undermined by Vash. The problem here is that Vash is perfectly capable of saving herself. Okay. She is not helpless. She does not actually understand at the beginning what's going on. She actually thinks she's just been transported into this time and place. It's not until later, after she's actually kind of rescued herself, that she finds out that this is something that Q has done because of Picard. Right, so Q's plan is undermined by Vash, who's perfectly capable of saving herself. By the time Picard's Robin Hood arrives, she's already done so, having not known that this whole situation was a result of Q's actions, and thinking she'd been genuinely transported to Nottingham. She further shows her independence by, quote, capturing Robin Hood, okay, for Sir Guy of Gisborne, who is the man via whom she has saved herself because he gave her the option of marrying her or losing her head, and she chose the one that was going to keep her head. So she hands Robin Hood, Picard, to Sir Guy of Gisborne, calls him a wedding present. But we find out, because Q has taken on the position of the sheriff, and he finds her out and ends up sending her to execution as well, because she tries to send a message to the rest of the Enterprise crew that are sitting in the forest being merry men, at Picard's demand that they do not get involved in this. Of course they do. We see... all right, so then they're sent to the execution as well, and necessitating that the crew of merry men rescue them both. We see all sorts of tropes of medievalism here, particularly with its castle and the set dressing and inhabitants. I'll go there. Vash is watched over by a lady's maid or nurse who wants to calm her down with a package of nice fresh leeches that she just got. The nurse also counsels her to marry Sir Guy because of his position and his money. There's no modern questions of whether or not, she likes him at all, much less loves him. The executioner is hooded, and he has an axe that is, the point is made to say it might not be terribly sharp. And the crew is dressed to identify as their various characters. I'll go back to the other slide here. Okay, you have Riker as Little John, Data as Friar Tuck, LaForge is Alan Adale, and Worf is Will Scarlet, despite his infamous protestation, of course, that he is not a merry man. Crusher and Troy are also included in the group, but while they don't have actual correlations to characters in the Robin Hood story, they are basically some of the merry men, and they are not, as they might say in Men in Tights, stuck in ladies' clothing. So they're there, they get involved, but they're not really given much of a position beyond on the side. Okay. Right, so they're basically like background people in Sherwood Forest. Okay. When they go to rescue Maid Marian, of course, you can see the picture in the middle there, Picard/Robin Hood is trying to get her to go out the window, and she says she's already taken care of things, and that's how they get caught. There's our executioner there with the not quite sharp blade. So there's a distraction and that Data creates, and we have the Enterprise crew coming to the rescue of Captain Picard and Vash. In this sequence, there is a beautiful sword fight between Sir Guy and Captain Picard/Robin Hood. In this, there is a line, Guy of Gisborne says, I'll have you know I am the best swordsman in Nottingham. And then they fight a little more, and then something akin to I'm not left-handed from the Princess Bride. Picard says, I should let you know I'm not from Nottingham, and then, defeats him and knocks him off the stairs and all of that. Just as an aside from the I'm not left-handed bit from Princess Bride, I've always thought this was a reference to something, but I could not, in looking this up for the life of me, figure out what else it might be a reference to. So if anybody knows, please tell me. And of course, at the end, the good guys are triumphant and Robin Hood gets the girl, except he doesn't. Again, the trope is shifted. Okay. Q offers Vash an opportunity to accompany him on adventures, to see all of the things that she has seen in archaeological bits, but see them in real life, because Q can be anywhere in time and space he wants to. And so she goes with Q. Maid Marian goes with the sheriff, happily, and Robin Hood allows it. Okay. So that undermines the ideas as well. And of course, in the end, all of this leads to Captain Picard having shenanigans, trying to find Marian and ending up in an alternate universe version of Robin Hood, in which he has to pretend he is Sir Richard the Lionheart. The end. If people are not familiar, the image there is from Robin Hood's Men in Tights. Carrie Elways and Amy... Oh, her name just... Amy Yazbek. Okay, are Robin and Marian. And of course, Patrick Stewart does come in at the end, a la the end of Prince of Thieves, as Richard the Lionheart, and demands to be able to give away Marian, but first he has to share a very long and Mel Brooksian amusingly kiss. So thank you.